Is Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois. He's a veteran of combat operations in Iraq and Afghanistan and a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. So members of Congress have been getting briefings from the Biden administration, obviously without divulging any classified information. What is your assessment of the situation in Ukraine now, more than a week into the war?
Well, I think it's going, better for the Ukrainians than initially expected. And I think President Zelensky, with his decision to stay and fight, has made a lot to basically give the morale for the Ukrainians to fight. The Russian troops don't have morale right now. But this is going to be a long slog. This is going to be really intense, obviously, against civilians, as we've seen. I think the administration has done a lot, frankly, to make sure we're supplying, to make sure that we're uniting Europe. But this is just the beginning, I fear, of a really bad war.
As far as we know, you are the only member of the House and one of only two in the entire Congress, along with Senator, I think, Wicker, advocating for NATO and the U.S. to enforce a no-fly zone over the skies of Ukraine. You're a former Air Force pilot. You know better than I do how much that could bring the United States into direct conflict with Russia. Given how focused Putin has been on this mission and how brazen he's been, why wouldn't a no-fly zone cause World War III?
Well, look, I think it's a good question. I think we have to first off recognize that, we've been used to, as Americans, we've been blessed to not, to always have a risk-free choice. We don't have risk-free choices right now in this. I mean, even with what we saw with the scare with the nuclear plant, we came, frankly, close to a huge tragedy. So that said, I see as this develops, as this gets worse, as the situation continues to decline, I fear that then we will have to take broader military action, particularly if there's some massive tragedy and after we see more and more pictures come out. Look, I know that it's frightening, the idea of a no-fly zone, and I do recognize there is risk with it. And I think short of it, we need to continue to send Stinger missiles and everything else. But that said, if Vladimir Putin really is going to use nuclear weapons against the West and NATO, keep in mind, this was the old Soviet Union playbook to always threaten it. And it also shows you that if Vladimir Putin's willing to threaten it, it's the one thing he fears. But if he's really going to do that, he would use them against Ukraine. I mean, the reality is, I think we're going to be forced to intervene sooner or later. I hope not. I think this is the cleanest and easiest thing to save Ukrainian lives and send a message to push Russia back further and deny that airspace to them.
Why do you think other staunch advocates for Ukraine, such as Congresswoman Liz Cheney or Senator Marco Rubio, aren't with you on this call for a no-fly zone?
Look, it's a tough decision. It's a tough call. I mean, and again, there always is a risk of escalation. The difference is I fear that risk of escalation is happening regardless. It's going to continue to get bigger and bigger. And so, look, I was also the first member of Congress to call for bombing ISIS, and I was told that was certainly going to start another large Iraqi war. 6 months later, we're bombing ISIS. So I hope I'm wrong, especially if we don't end up doing the no-fly zone. But I do fear that I'm not. And so in the short of that, I think whether sending drones, giving Ukraine drones to use as the Turkish drones have been used so effectively, more Stinger missiles, that should be done in the near term for sure.
NATO says that Russian forces are using cluster bombs. The Russians attacked with military force a nuclear power plant overnight. Russia continues to target civilian apartments. There have been too many civilians who have died for this to be an errant missile. There are global calls for the International Criminal Court to pursue Vladimir Putin for war crimes. Do you think that should happen, and would that make a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. It has to happen. I mean, we have to have these standards, and there's no doubt that Putin is a war criminal. I'm not sure he necessarily fears that threat. I think he's content right now being isolated in the middle of Russia. Obviously, he has not traveled in a while. We don't understand his mental state. But I think for the sake of humanity and for the sake of standards, we have to pursue this. There's no doubt. And again, I fear, Jake, that as time goes on, as every day that goes on, we're going to see more and more war crimes occur ordered by Vladimir Putin. And I certainly hope that doesn't include thermobaric bombs, et cetera.
You're also on the January 6th Select House Committee, so I want to ask you about that court filing this week from the committee indicating that former President Trump, in your committee's view, may have been part of a criminal conspiracy. Obviously, you don't have the powers to charge the president. Is the committee going to make a criminal referral to the Justice Department?
Well, I can't answer that, but what I can say is we were asked if there is a fraud and crime exemption to the attorney-client privilege between. First off,
we lost Congressman Kinzinger there in the era of Zoom. Congressman Kinzinger, thank you so much. We'll have you back soon.